Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting to order. The Development Review Board for the City of Montpelier is now in session for this Monday, October 21st, 2019. My name is Daniel Richardson. I serve as the chair. The other members of the board from my right are
Rob Goodwin.
Kevin O'Connell.
Michael Lazorchak.
Meredith Crandall, staff.
Kate McCarthy.
First item of business is approval of the agenda. We have one item of business as far as applications are concerned, 18 Marvin Street. Does anybody have any additions or amendments to the agenda as printed? If not, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda as printed.
So moved.
Motion by Kevin. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Rob. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. We have an agenda. There are no comments from the chair this evening, other than I will make this sort of general observation and note, which is that we are usually a 7-member board. We currently have a 5 members before you because of absences, but the vote will still have to be 4 in favor to approve the application. That doesn't change the threshold requirement for voting. The applicant, because of the less than full contingency of the board, has of course the option to continue this to another evening if the applicant so wishes, but I will simply note that in doing so, that's really a single choice. It's not a let me get the temperature of the board, let me get a measurement of everyone's feelings. It's a I would like to wait or I would like to go forward kind of question. So I'll just simply note that that's there simply because we do not have the full contingency, and but we do have plenty to review, and we only need 4 to approve based on the normal 7-member membership. So,
Mr. Chair, may I clarify that point?
yes.
Is it necessary for the applicant to make that decision about whether to continue before presenting evidence, or can the applicant go through the process of presenting the project and then choose to continue? What is the order of operations for that decision?
It can happen any time before we close the record, simply because we would, but once we close the record and really take the matter under advisement, or start to move into a motion, then it's too late. But up until then, the applicant has the ability to do so, and I simply offer that. Some applicants go forward and have no problem with 5 people. Some applicants wish that full contingency. It's certainly their right, and we've offered it before in the past. But thanks for clarification. First item of business is reviewing the minutes. Myself, Kevin, Kate, and Rob. So we have a foursome to review and approve the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes or additions?
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the minutes of October 7th as printed.
Okay, motion by Kate. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Rob. All those in favor of approving the October 7th minutes as drafted, please raise your right hand if you're eligible. All eligible voted in favor, and the minutes are adopted. First item of business is 18 Marvin Street, Robert and Maria Proctor. If the applicant is here, please come forward to the table.
I have some copies from John Marchek, Jr.
Okay.
Engineering.
One sort of technical note, be careful, each of those little black rounded things are microphones, so just watch where you put the
okay.
maps, otherwise we get a lot of feedback. And what I'll have you do is, before you start introducing some of those maps, if you just state your name for the record.
Okay, sure. Robert Proctor.
Okay, and Mr. Proctor, I'm going to put you under oath. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence and testimony you're about to give for the matter under consideration shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under pains and penalties of perjury?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Is anyone else here to be heard on this particular application and is likely to speak? If you could just raise your hand. Here's what I'll do. Given I will put individuals under oath when we take public comment or comment from adjoining neighbors after the primary application. But don't speak until I have an opportunity to have your name on the record and then swear you in, okay? Thanks. So, Mr. Proctor, go ahead and why don't you introduce, this is the second round of the
This
subdivision.
is the second meeting, and it was recommended by the board that we,
You might want to stay by your microphone while you're talking.
oh, okay.
Sorry, it's hard to multitask.
It was recommended by the board that we have an engineer look at the property to see if there was any problem at all with stormwater coming off of it. And we used Grenier Engineering, Don Marsh, and he felt there are quite a few applications which would handle the problem. And the one he thought might be best was to run it to a stormwater drain on the Turner's property, of which he did an outline of this. And at one point, we thought that the easement to do that might be necessary before we do this, but we were told by Meredith and Tom that it's not really the right time to do it, and until the project or whatever anybody's gonna do on the property is decided, there are alternatives as to how to do that. But I do have copies of that drawing, which Meredith asked me to bring through.
When you say Tom, you mean Tom McCardle, the
Yes.
Public Works Director.
Yes. There are 5 or 6 of them there, if you wanna get them.
Two sheets.
And I've got some extras I'll pass out to the audience. Did you keep one for yourself?
I did, yes, I
Okay,
have one, thank you.
good.
So, Mr. Proctor, if I understand correctly, this engineering drawing is illustrating what looks like a new catch basin
A new catch basin, yes.
that would tie into an existing catch basin at the back of the Turner property?
Yes, believe it's 8 feet into the Turner property. There's a city storms water drain.
Okay, and then there looks like another sewer line, is that right, going in, or is that an existing one?
I think that's an existing one. As far as I'm recall, there was only one that was gonna be,
Well, so it indicates a new sewer line that would go to an existing manhole, and so that would be more for waste, sewer waste, as opposed to stormwater runoff.
no, there's a stormwater catch that will go to a stormwater drain on their property. But there were alternatives also, but from speaking with Tom and Meredith and Dan, it was said that the actual way of running the stormwater off should not be decided until there's an application to do something on the property itself, and we know what kind of effect it will make, whatever is being built or not being built.
Right, no, I understand that's for the catch basin that's illustrated in this picture, but just south of that, there's a line with an S's in between, which usually indicates, in my experience, sewer lines. And it looks like it goes onto the Turner property to what's called an SMH, which I understand to be a sewer manhole. So I just want to be clear and understand that this is proposing to put a sewer line across the Turner property as well to an existing town sewer manhole line. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if that's correct or not. The city said there was no problem running a sewer line to it, and I don't remember Don telling me that there was a new sewer line there.
Can I had an email from Don today, so this might help a little bit.
Okay.
Because he references both the sewer and the stormwater connections there, but that they're options. And I can't remember if Tom's email said it exactly. I mean, there is a sewer line running down Marvin Street. So a builder would have the option of having a pump system to pump up the storm line in Marvin Street. It just would be more expensive, potentially, at least with the mechanics of it. But there also isn't an actual easement signed for the Turner property yet. But these are all options. It's just, they're all technically feasible. It's what exactly a new owner or, the
Right.
Proctors or some other developer would actually decide to do with this based on whether or not they could get an easement. And it's a sort of a money question,
Okay.
more than a technical
And
feasibility.
also, the city told us that they can tie the regular sewer line into the line that runs from 18 Marvin Street, which does not pump up to Marvin, it actually goes back that way. They said it's a big enough pipe to tie into that if they wanted to.
Just to understand, the scope of our role is to make sure that when and if this lot is subdivided, that it can be developed safely. And so what we're hearing is that there isn't only one way to handle sewer, and there isn't only one way to handle stormwater. There are multiple ways,
That's
such
what-
that the easement would be one option, but if the easement doesn't pan out,
Right,
Others
there
could
was
be
something called
other
a
options.
rain garden in the back that's
Yeah.
possible, there's pumping the water up. Don said there's even more options if we need to look at it,
Okay.
depending on what is developed there at
Okay.
some point.
all right, thanks.
Thank you, Kate.
Okay.
You're welcome.
So, one other question that I had, which was in regards to there's an exhibit here in our packet that looks like it was presented, and it's the City of Montpelier permanent easement for storm and sewer line. That looks to illustrate the properties along Liberty Street that abut Marvin Street. And there looks as if there's an easement going through the back of them.
Yeah, this is, I
Okay.
just want to, if you don't mind, because
Yeah,
I
please.
added this in.
Okay,
I added this in to help clarify Tom McCardle's comments because he references this permanent easement. And if suddenly people started asking questions about it, I wanted to make sure this was in here.
okay.
Because the permanent easement, if somebody was like, oh, how far does the permanent easement go? Can the Proctor property actually reach to it without having to get a private easement or anything? And they would still have to get a private easement over the Turner property, which on this, older document is signified by the Richard Provost property.
Okay. Because the easement doesn't run along the property line,
Right,
which would
the
be
easement doesn't run along the property line. It's quite a ways in. So I put it in here for clarification because Tom had referenced it.
Right. Well, that's helpful. That's actually predicting the questions that I was gonna have as to,
I had the same questions.
So just so we're clear that to do what Don Marsh has proposed is one option, which is to run the lines, the storm and sewer lines, back to the permanent easement would require permission from the Turners.
Yes,
Okay. And that is not something you're presenting today as something you've already obtained.
no, I was actually told by Meredith and Tom that at this point, that shouldn't be something we bring to this meeting because it isn't pertinent to a subdivision.
Well, it was more along the lines of if you hadn't gotten it, it wasn't a huge issue because there are other options for dealing with the stormwater and the sewer. So it wasn't necessary for tonight.
Right.
If you had it, great. If not, then it wasn't necessarily, gonna be a huge red check against the application.
It would have been an issue if it was the one and only option
Yeah,
to get rid
Yes,
of your
that's what I was trying to
stormwater and
Yes.
sewer.
Since there's
Yeah.
some different options, one of them.
Okay. So, and just to be clear, we're talking about multiple options for both the stormwater runoff, and to list a few, there's the option number one that Don Marsh has laid out in this Grenier engineering design.
Uh-huh.
But there's also the possibility of a rain garden, there's also the possibility of
Pumping the water up.
or designing, changing the layout of the land, is that the other possibility to how it contours?
I don't know what, he mentioned there are other possibilities also. He wasn't really clear with me as to what those would be. He said the best thing is to see what kind of thing is gonna go in there and what it would require at
Okay.
that time.
And
But
then,
theirs could definitely be done, it's not a problem.
okay, and then the sewer options would be, as Don has laid out,
Uh-huh.
or bringing it up to Marvin Street at one of 2 points.
Yes,
One might require a pump and one might not.
exactly.
Okay.
And if I'm not mistaken, the city also said they could tie into the line we have there now. Now that, I don't know the exact, how that would exactly be done, but they said as long as it's over a 5-inch pipe that runs from the house on 18 Marvin Street now, it's no problem to put another one on it, and that is a 6-inch pipe.
Okay. Oh, so to tie into your existing line?
Yes.
So they would share one single line. Okay. Does anyone have any other questions about stormwater or sewer? Okay. I'll note, just sort of as a preliminary, we reviewed this last time, but a lot of the general standards as far as the setbacks, size of the lot, potential coverage, all seem to have been met by this particular design, which is, we wouldn't have an issue with creating a building in the setback as the only possible place to put a building, or that any building is likely to be oversized on the lot as far as its percentage of coverage. A lot of these sort of minor, but important technical issues. The next big issue, was the, actually the driveway. So what is the proposal for the driveway for this lot?
The proposal right now, which we had a drawing done of, is to share the driveway with 18 Marvin there now. Perhaps extend the cutback a little bit on the street or not, depending on the construction of it.
Okay. So it would be, and I'm looking at, well, I think I'll go off of the engineering design that you showed, but it shows
Okay.
a single driveway on 18 Marvin, and then the other driveway would come off of that.
Run right next to it, exactly another 15 feet.
So is the current curb cut 22 feet wide? And the recommendation of the staff is that that be narrowed actually by 2 feet to 20 feet as a curb
I did read
cut.
something about that. I didn't know if that was why that was. I did read that Tom said that, I believe.
Yeah, that was from Tom McCardle.
Do you have any objection to that being a condition, that be reduced? And the reason, as I understand from Tom McCardle's report, is that 22 feet or anything wider than that is too much. It's too big of an opening, and the idea is to make, you don't want too narrow of a driveway opening, but at the same time, you don't want
Too wide.
sort of a parking lot entrance,
Right,
especially
no, I
for
know.
residential.
So what we're saying is just close that in by 2 feet.
Right.
We have no objection to that.
Okay. And there's a note that prior to construction, obviously, a final driveway design will need to be prepared and submitted,
Yes.
because,
At this point, we have no intention of doing any
Right.
construction, so.
and the idea is that the asphalt curb line, gutter, and low-profile berm crossing the current driveway will be maintained as a design feature of the new expanded curb cut.
Fine, that's fine.
Okay. because of the topography of the land. I mean, I think that seems like something you would want as well.
Yeah,
so
no, I
water
think that's
wouldn't
the
come-
logical way to do it, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on the parking, the driveway entrance? The parking itself doesn't raise any issues. The next effectively contested issue would be the utilities along, and under our bylaws, there's a requirement that the applicant shall design the subdivision to provide utility service to each lot not intended for conservation purposes, and to locate them underground unless prevented by ledge or other physical conditions.
Yes, I spoke to the electric company about that,
Okay.
and I believe they submitted a letter that we have there. They have never done an underground utility in Montpelier. This, I believe, is a fairly new law and has come in recently and was, but they said it is feasible, of course. The difference in cost would be, actually, there's a grant from the state, I believe, or perhaps it was the city, for putting in new electric where they grant you $500, so it would only cost about $100 to connect to the above ground things there. They said to do the underground, it's feasible to do, it would be about $575 if I remember correctly, but they don't actually run it underground. You would have to get a private contractor to dig a trench 4 feet, cover it with cement all the way around, and you'd be looking at $5,000 to $10,000. But they said it's never been done in Montpelier, so they didn't really know too much about it.
Well,
They thought it was put in for new subdivisions somewhere, but I don't know.
and I'm looking at a picture of Marvin Street that's in our staff report that appears to be facing west, looking with your property, your existing property on the right-hand side of the picture. And the utilities are all located on the left side across the street. So when they say locating utilities underground, they're talking about digging up the street as well.
Marvin Street, yeah.
Okay.
Including the going under, or however, the sewer and the stormwater lines that run along that street,
Right.
and water lines.
Interfering with that.
Yeah.
And your estimates are between $5,000 and $10,000 as opposed.
To do that, it's opposed to $100.
$100 or
Just connect to
$500.
the above ground.
Okay. Any further questions from the board? I mean, that seems consistent with what we've found with other applications and seem to make this less than feasible. So let's talk about the landscaping. And in the landscaping, it says the applicant shall design the subdivision to maximize the preservation of existing mature vegetation, provide additional landscaping, which may be installed when the lots are subsequently developed as necessary to maintain and provide privacy, both for adjoining property owners and between the lots within the subdivision, to enhance the appearance of street frontage and shade trees and sidewalks, maintain or establish vegetated buffers along waterways and other natural areas, and utilize green stormwater infrastructure practices. So from the pictures that have been submitted, it looks as if the proposed site shows potential privacy fence and lilac bush located along Lot 2's property boundaries for screening from the immediate neighbors as well as the road. What is your proposal for the landscaping?
Well, the landscaping, our proposal was to put the lilac trees up in the front to give privacy, but depending on, and a privacy fence along the property running for approximately 40 feet when you're looking at the property on the right side. There was a fence there in disrepair, which we've taken down, and gonna put a new one up there. But the final landscaping was dependent on what's being done there, really. So, I mean, there's lots of options for landscaping. The back of the property has quite a few trees which wouldn't be touched, and in the front it would just be something very accommodating to how it's gonna be built.
And is it the case when a building permit is applied for that landscaping is considered then as well?
To a degree, but if it's a single-family home, the site plan regulations don't apply, so what what I think the board has done previously is just say that any future zoning permit application would need to include plans for meeting the landscaping and screening requirements of section 506 F1, 2, and 4.
Okay. 'Cause I wouldn't want to lock you into 5 lilac bushes.
Right.
As
No,
much as I like
appreciate that, 'cause
lilacs.
as we're not
Right.
sure.
Yeah, and so,
But, you
And
know,
also
you
on
may
the-
want to have a front porch, you may want to have front steps that kind of
Exactly.
interface with the
Depending
street and
on
not
what's going
hide.
on.
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I
And
mean,
we
you can,
also may want something on the left, excuse me, you know, where the driveways are
Yeah.
to give some privacy. That depends on.
Okay.
yeah, and this driveway plan is an option. Somebody else could purchase one parcel and not the other and have a different driveway plan.
Very true.
Possible.
So, would you have an objection if we made a condition that, you know, the landscaping plan, there would have to be a landscaping plan upon development of this lot, such
No
that
objection
met-
at all. I think, yeah, anybody who would want to do something would want to
Right.
do some landscaping for sure.
and that this would have to meet our requirements, and that we would need to review that,
Yes, that's fine.
or the administratively?
Yeah, I think previously, I don't think we've said that it has to come back before the DRB.
Yeah.
As long as, you know, if it gets to a question of whether or not it actually complies, the zoning administrator should be sending it up here if they can't make that judgment call.
Do you have a problem with?
No,
Objection to, okay. So, I will note that, you know, it does appear from the photographs, and just to make sure these are accurate, that the front of the property does not have a lot of trees right now. It appears to be open.
Not a lot. There's, I believe, one tree and some smaller growth also.
Okay, but that most of the trees are in the back of the lot
Yes,
towards,
the larger trees, certainly.
towards the rear and the Liberty Street lots that abut.
Yes.
All right. So the next question is character of the neighborhood and settlement pattern.
Okay.
How is this lot, how are you proposing this lot to be marketed? Is it residential or commercial or?
I think it would be residential. I don't know, haven't even looked into whether commercial's available there or not. It's not something that entered my mind. I know that Kate last time mentioned the imprint could be 2,500 square feet on that type of zoning. It's not something that I have any plans to do or not do, you know. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you said also that it could be zoned duplex or something else. I'm not really sure what it was
I'm
a
not remembering
6,000
off the top of
square
my head.
foot college area. And since I'm not
The
really interested in developing it myself, I didn't look into all the details of what could be done there.
So you
Sure, so
just-
the 6,000 feet you're referring to is that in this zoning district, the minimum lot size is 6,000 square
Uh-huh.
feet. You're proposing a lot that is larger.
Yes,
Than that.
7,500 square feet.
The footprint of the building may be up to 2,500 square feet, with a maximum height of 35 feet. And then all within the setbacks and everything, with 50% coverage of the lot, so there is a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head if duplexes are allowed in this area. It probably says right in here.
You can have up to 2 dwelling units on any parcel, irrespective of density.
There you go. So this could be developed in a number
Right.
of ways.
Yeah.
But you're looking to just market this as a piece of raw land that the person purchasing it would develop consistent with the zoning bylaws and
Yes,
requirements.
or if in the future we decided to build a house on there, we would certainly just go with a small, even smaller than 2,500 square foot, very private type of house, if it was something we did, but at this point, we have no intention to do that.
I will note that this does create a logical rectangular lot. You currently have an L-shaped lot that sits with a lot of frontage along Marvin Street and then
Right.
dips back on this lot, but is more shallow where your existing home is
Yes,
located. And that at the end of this, there'll be two roughly, one's a little bit more trapezoidal in shape, but logical rectangular lots, and this is consistent with what the city has promoted as far as infill, taking a lot that your current lot is well in excess of the minimum lot size of this, and that as a result, there'll be a second building lot to build in an existing neighborhood
Yes,
that, if built in conformance with the zoning, would effectively allow for greater density within this existing neighborhood.
yes.
I just also know, I think, I recall from the sketch plan hearing, we had testimony that this was actually once two lots.
Yes, it was.
And so essentially, you're just maybe slightly reconfiguring that, and.
I think it's almost along the exact same
Exactly,
lines what
right. Yeah.
Richard Bell did in the survey
Right.
is what was there before.
Absolutely.
Any further questions from the board? Mr. Proctor, anything further that you wish to offer in the
No.
testimony? Okay, you'll have an opportunity, obviously, if there's further questions. At this point in time, I think it makes sense to have any of the.
I have one more question, just to clarify on the sewer. So the connection, you have two connections on Marvin Street as a possibility, one going through the existing house lot.
Mhm.
The second would be going directly to Marvin and not crossing the existing house lot?
Yes, to pump up from this lot directly to Marvin Street.
Yeah, and then there's actually a third, Rob. If they got an easement over the Turner land, they could also go downhill.
Right, yeah, okay. So it doesn't appear that was a
But it's,
possibility at this point in time, but, I don't know.
so for technical,
Technical.
not speaking of what has been legally agreed to, for technical reasons,
Sure.
for DPW's possibilities and engineering possibilities, those three separate engineering possibilities.
Right, and, part of our job as subdivision is not necessarily to come in and scrutinize any particular easements that are necessary, but, to take the applicant's representations and experts as this is a possibility, so that, if the subdivision was granted, it could be built upon, but of course, if they choose not to, it won't. But that's a private legal matter as to those type of issues. Our goal mainly being not to grant a non-conforming lot or one that is likely to fail. So, and any further questions? Good. So if anyone from the audience or the attendants wish to speak, what I'd ask is that you go to the microphone, introduce yourself, I'll swear you in, and then if you have questions, if you have a statement, we'll take them as they come.
Good evening. My name is Martha Smirsky. I live at 15 Marvin Street, directly across the street from the property that's existing. I wrote a letter on June 29th.
Oh,
for-
can I swear you in? Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give for the matter under consideration shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under pains and penalties of perjury?
Yes.
Thank you.
I wrote a letter on the 29th of June indicating my objection to the subdivision. I had basically two concerns, one being the drainage issue, another being a driveway issue. The one thing that we haven't heard anything about here tonight is the slope of this property. One of the things that I brought up in my original letter was the fact that the section that they're considering subdividing sits very far down below the street level here. In order to actually build on that property, I would assume that one would have to be bringing in a lot of fill. As the board knows, some other properties in this area have been built with fill, and they have not been successful. I'm specifically thinking about one on Bingham Street, where the fill actually started to erode, leaving the slab that the house was built on hanging in the air in one area. I have a lot of concerns about that. It is a tight neighborhood, and knowing that house would have to come up significantly in order to be accessible to the street is one of my concerns. Also, tonight we've heard about a shared driveway, which is directly across from my property. I'm not sure how that could work, given the slope of the land. We do have problems with drainage in our area. It's extremely heavy clay. And when it is heavy April weather, we do have problems with water, and I think that's important to note too.
Good, thank you. Mr. Proctor, do you have any
I do.
further testimony?
Don Marsh looked at the property and engineering things as, he was looking for the stormwater drain. He said it's absolutely no problem to build on the flat area there. Now, I'm not an engineer, but that's what he said. There's no problems building there at all, and depending on what you would build would depend on how you did the stormwater runoff. Right now, there's nothing there for the stormwater runoff, and he didn't, depending on what went in there, might affect it and it might not, but you would go along with it. But as far as building, he said, there's a big flat area that's perfect for building.
Okay.
So you and Mr. Marsh did not discuss fill being
No
a
fill at all.
necessity,
No, not a necessity.
even for the sake of accessing it between getting out of your car, or for functioning of the driveway, or for movement
For
of people
functioning of the
between the
driveway.
driveway or the house itself, where
No,
that may be.
functioning of the driveway now, you might, which we have there now, there are a few steps that go down to that area, and you could do that also.
Okay.
I mean, that would be ultimately the decision of the person installing this, if they chose to put in fill or if to raise the level up.
That's what I think, and as, I don't remember who said it, it's possible to even move the driveway if they wish to do it to a different location. That's a possibility depending on what they do.
Go ahead. If you just state your name and I'll swear you in.
Michelle Braun. I live at 21 Marvin Street.
Michelle, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you're about to give for the matter under consideration shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under pains and penalties of perjury?
Yes.
Very good. Please.
So I love the suggestion of moving the driveway to a different location that Bob just made. The driveway where it's proposed, if it's shifted toward Bingham Street and widened, it then, as it's shown on that site plan, then aligns exactly with my driveway, which is not shown on the site plan, but is, on the opposite side of the street. We already have a hard time with people visiting 18 Marvin Street, parking smack at the end of our driveway. It makes it really hard to get in and out.
Is that along the public street that they do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, which, if you put a driveway there, maybe they would go in the driveway and they'd be less in the way. But it seems like putting the driveway at the flatter side of the parcel would mean less conflict with our driveway and also just a more accessible space because it's flatter. And it sounds like Bob and Mr. Marsh did not talk about fill, but Tom McCardle, in his discussion of the driveway, did say that in order to place it where it's proposed, there would be fill required.
Right.
So,
Okay.
that's all. Oh, and rain garden keeps coming up. I am, of course, a huge proponent of rain gardens, but in that location, in that soil, it's not going to help the Turners. So I would go with one of the other solutions.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask a clarifying question? So is your idea that the proposed parcel would ultimately have its own driveway developed as opposed to a shared? I want to ask what was about the witness testimony just now.
So she's
Um,
gonna
Ms.
come up
Ms.
to the-
Brown.
Yeah.
yeah.
When you said put it on the flat part instead,
Right.
do you mean give the new parcel its very
A
own
separate
driveway?
yes.
Separate access.
Okay.
A separate access at the more easterly
Okay.
side of the parcel.
Okay, and if we're talking about a shared driveway option, I just want to make sure I understand this. We're talking about more intensive use of an existing driveway. And
Right.
so is that a stormwater issue or a traffic issue?
Traffic.
Okay,
I mean,
So your suggestion to move it to the flat doesn't have to do with stormwater or fill, it has to do
Right.
with coming and going.
right, it's traffic. I mean, honestly, I think that adding fill in this area and expanding the driveway this way would probably not be helpful in terms of stormwater impact to the house. So maybe when somebody actually gets to the point of designing a house to go in here, they would come to that conclusion. But in terms of my personal interests, it's traffic.
Okay, and is the traffic about cars turning out and cars turning in on a daily basis? Because once
Right.
the driveway is built and the cars are in,
Yeah,
they're out of the way,
they're
they're
out
off
of the
the
way,
street.
yes,
So we're talking about, what, 5 or 10 trips a
coming
day?
and going, yeah.
Okay,
Well, and I also
Okay.
understood too that
Thank you.
so part of your concern was just the number of cars, that plenty of space for visitors, or
Right,
so that people wouldn't park in front of your driveway, creating hardships for you,
right,
is the other concern.
yeah. I mean, it's not the world's biggest hardship, it's just makes it hard to get in and out, so.
Okay.
So, just a quick little reminder
Yep.
about the access. This subdivision permit doesn't necessarily, it doesn't grant like a zoning permit or anything for this particular driveway design. An actual driveway construction permit would need to be required.
Sure.
So there's options here as to how, and this is not just for the board, but also for
Right.
people visiting here and attending today, that, this is again a being able to show that there is a permittable driveway, an access point. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is what's going to happen for the driveway. Unless the
Right.
board says this is what you must do.
That would need to be developed as a plan, an actual plan.
Right, that-
For development of the site.
For a zoning permit
Right,
and
so
a
it-
Department of Public Works
It's
permit.
important to emphasize that point, that this proceeding this evening is for the subdivision. It does not impact the design of the building or a building and any of the accessories such as a driveway that would go with it.
so, and just.
Unless the board decides it does.
Right, unless the board decides it does. So we're saying something's possible, we're not designing it. At the point when design of the driveway or a building on the lot begins to happen, are neighbors notified at that time and have the opportunity to comment? It's an administrative review,
If
so I'm
it's
wondering.
administrative review, they don't necessarily get that. There is the people can come in and say, hey, we wanna be notified of anything that happens with X property. It's a little hard administratively
Sure,
to keep that all up, but that
Yeah.
is a possibility.
yeah.
Um,
I'm just thinking, what's
and the board can require that development on a property come through here, but I'm not sure that this is not the type of property
Sure,
that normally
rises
the
to that
board would,
level.
that the board would
Yeah.
do that with.
Yeah, I'm just trying
But-
to, it's always easier to comment on a specific design than a hypothetical design,
Exactly.
and that makes a better conversation for everybody, so I'm
Yeah,
just
no,
trying to
Yep.
identify where those conversation points could actually happen.
So kind of what you're saying, I mean, not that I guess it's not written in gold, you said it could come before the board, but generally when someone does a zoning plan and tells you what they're gonna build, it's not in the same format we're using now, we don't come sit before you.
Not for a single family home or even a 2-unit.
Right.
But that would be something that would just go administratively in most instances unless there's some other triggering factor.
However, part of this process is to hear the comments of your neighbors and concerns, and so that's a valuable process. So you've heard testimony and concerns about what a shared driveway will look like. I'll note at the same time, our bylaws do encourage shared driveways. So
I remember
as
you
a
told me
general
that last
policy,
time, that it's something you like,
it's
actually.
it's not something where you must have a shared driveway, but it's definitely encouraged as a general rule. That said, if it makes more sense to have a separate driveway for other reasons and other site-specific conditions, there's nothing in the bylaws that prevent that.
From happening.
It's just in some ways to avoid, I think in some ways we recognize that every house needs a driveway. We're not at the point of flying cars or trains yet, and so every house has to have some sort of driveway access, and what's the best way to do it that keeps somewhat of a natural appearance, natural being a somewhat loaded word, but one that doesn't, maybe avoids a cookie cutter Levittown look to the
Right.
to the street.
But as you were saying, actually, Tom recommended even bringing the curb cut in a little bit, so I don't know that it would create more.
I think part of the problem is that we're talking in hypotheticals, but I think your neighbors, have expressed concerns. One of the concerns is about fill and, the dangers of fill. That said, there's fill everywhere in the city. Being in a river valley, we have a lot of lots that are built on fill. Some hold well, some do not. Some are done well and some are not. Obviously the problem is when you bring in fill, you have to make sure it's a good quality and it's done right, and erosion measures are taken so that the fill does not suddenly wipe out and end up in the Turner's backyard or somewhere else and your house is now teetering. Those are all concerns, but those are more mechanical concerns than our larger zoning concerns, and how that's done. But obviously, if it's something where you can avoid it, those have been laid out there. And it's in the interest of both you as the applicant as well as the neighbors to, hear each other and listen to those concerns and understand where they come from. Anyone else wish to express either any sort of questions or issues? Good. All right. Well, with that, does the board have any other follow-up questions? How do we wish to proceed? We have two options. One is to close the record and take a vote now, or we can move into deliberative session, which would also be closing the record, but would give us an opportunity to talk through some of the conditions and issues that have been raised by this application, as well as any of the comments and feedback that we've received throughout this process.
Mr. Chair, I would propose that we close the record and move to deliberative session so that we can be very specific and succinct in our evaluation of the evidence submitted, and that we can respond adequately to the issues that have been raised here tonight.
Okay. I'll take that as a motion, Kevin. Do I have a second?
Second?
I have a second by Kate. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of closing the record and moving it into deliberative session, please raise your right hand. All right, the record is closed. We're going to move into deliberative session. We're going to review the evidence. What will happen is we'll issue a decision after this deliberative session, not tonight, so please don't stick around. You have better things to do with your evening. But there will be a written decision that will be issued and will reflect our considerations. So thank you all very much for participating, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
So, going back to the agenda, there are no other applications. I'll just simply make a note of other business before we go into the deliberative session, that our next meeting date is November 4th, 2019, and it will be at 7 p.m. That is the first Monday in November. Any other business?
Yes, I'd like to mention once again for our friends in TV land that we would love to have you join us here in person as part of this board. And we're seeking an alternate as well as a permanent member. So there are 2 positions open. Please apply.
Thank you. Good plug.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. With that, we'll move into deliberative session as the motion has requested. Thank you very much.